going to announce Duncan, or introduce Duncan. I see from his CV he's probably a Queensland product too.
Yep.
Or if he isn't, he had the good sense to go up there for his education. He's part of the Queensland diaspora, and we'd like to see him back at some stage, and I'll call him to speak now.
G'day. I was asked to come and give a libertarian agenda to reduce poverty. And in response, I essentially just want to make 2 points, maybe a bit off the topic I was asked to speak on. I actually don't think that poverty reduction is a role of government. I'll spend a bit of time explaining that and a bit of time explaining why I think it's important that we don't give up ground on that particular point. As it happens, I just think that good government generates a byproduct of reducing poverty. It's essentially incidental to good government. So they're my 2 points, and I'll hopefully explain those. On the first issue, I'll go through 2 particular ways of arguing the idea that poverty reduction is not a role of government. The first line of argument is that there is no free rider problem to resolve. Some people argue that it is essentially in the interests of the rich to have the forced income redistribution that comes with government playing the role of a poverty reducer. I don't see that free rider issue. The argument would go that some rich people, in the absence of government intervention, would give to help the poor, whilst others would not. The argument then goes on to say that those who do not give nonetheless get some benefit from the giving of the others. I disagree with that point. There will be some rich non-givers who don't care about the poor. There will be some rich non-givers who believe they can protect themselves cost-effectively from adverse consequences of their being poor people, be they criminal or aesthetic. And there will be some rich non-givers who will think that the giving of others will be ineffective. It might be a moral argument that you then get drawn into, but at that point you're leaving the world of what is the real world and you're into a moral argument. In the real world, it is not the case that it is in the interests of the rich cohort to have forced income redistribution. So that's the first point that I think we need to make as libertarians. Now, in response to that, we'll have people say, okay, it's not in the interests of the rich cohort, but yes, they are hurt, but the gain for the poor is more. And this is a standard argument that we'll come across. And I want to run through that argument because I believe there are at least 9 arguments why we should question the idea that there is a net benefit from government playing the role of forced income redistribution. Now, I'll use what many of you will be familiar with, a standard chart. So it's essentially a theoretical and utilitarian point that I'm going to make. This chart, some of you will be familiar with. It's reasonably simple analysis, but I think it's good that we reiterate the simple points in our literature. Here, money is along the horizontal axis and happiness is along the vertical axis, and the green line indicates a typical relationship between money and happiness. When people have more money, they tend to be happier. And with additions of money, the additions of happiness may be somewhat less. I have no particular problem with that general line of analysis. Indeed, the idea that if you had $10,000 you'd buy certain things, and then if you happen to get $20,000 you'd buy another bundle of things, and the idea that the first bundle would be superior to the second bundle because you chose it first, makes some sense to me. It's revealed preference. However, That general argument has at least 9 critiques which I've highlighted along the left, which I will try to briefly run through. Some of them you'll be familiar with. I'll try not to labour them too much. In total, looking at all of those critiques, I'm of the view that it is highly dubious that there is a net benefit from forced income redistribution by government. That is, to the extent that the rich are hurt, that hurt might be greater than any gain that goes to the poor. Firstly, I'll talk about crowding out. It's the key point, I think, to making this argument. Forced income redistribution by government reduces philanthropy. Now, we don't want to overstate that analysis. The empirics is actually quite complicated in trying to work this out. They do find an effect of crowding out, not just because rich people would be less willing and able to give, but largely because charities that get co-opted by the government and receive grants to do this forced income redistribution put less effort into fundraising. But nonetheless, there is a crowding out effect. We shouldn't overstate how large that crowding out effect is. Rich people will still get the warm glow effect of giving, even though the government is also entering that domain. And rich philanthropists may very well think that what the government is doing is helping the wrong people in the wrong way, so they may continue to give. And there are also crowding in effects that are covered in the literature, so it's actually reasonably complicated. But nonetheless, my reading of the literature is that there is an overall crowding out effect. That means, as would be indicated on this chart, that the potential amount of overall money or goods in kind that would go to rich people and go to poor people is less because of that crowding out. Similar reasoning leads to the idea that administration costs reduce the amount of wealth that gets transferred to poor people. Again, we have to be dealing with real data, and we have to acknowledge that a number of charities have substantial administration costs themselves. So it's an empirical task to compare the administration costs of the ATO and Centrelink compared to various charities. The third point I want to turn to, very briefly, is the standard idea that if you have a tax system, you will discourage rich people to earn their lifetime income and build the size of the pie, and you will also have effective marginal tax rates at the low end that discourage people who exit poverty traps. Pretty standard argument there, empirical test to work out how big that is. But there are 2 further issues that I've highlighted there, loss and compliance, which essentially don't relate to the transfer of money. Independently of the transfer of money, a rich person is hurt through forced income redistribution. We know from behavioural economics that losses are more deeply felt than gains. This is particularly the case here because the losses are a result of coercion by government. There's an associated feeling of violation. That should be taken into account. Also should be taken into account is independently of the transfer of money, both the poor person who has to deal with Centrelink and the rich person who has to deal with the ATO incur a compliance cost. All of these factors whittle away at the argument that there is some straightforward net benefit to the overall society from this redistribution. Targeting was touched on by Michaela. If the government did indeed focus its efforts on those who are the least well off, there might be a stronger argument. But we know that government, for various reasons, does not do that. Bureaucrats have an incentive to do the easier task of transferring money to people who at least have a bank account, rather than getting their hands dirty and helping the person on the street. And politicians have the political imperative to try to generate votes by helping people further up the income scale. As these charts progress, you will see that the gains for the losses for the rich person might get more and more substantial, and the gains for the poor person might get less and less significant. A reasonably novel couple of points might follow. Firstly, the argument that forced income redistribution is a clear benefit is questioned by the fungibility of money. Money can be used for various things. including for things that make you happier as you get richer and richer. In addition, money can be used at various points in time. You can borrow and save, and you can receive inheritances and you can make bequests. And thirdly, and most importantly, money can be used on people other than yourself. These various uses of money means that you can, even if your own needs are satisfied, you can then turn to the task of improving the lives of your family, your friends, your community, and absolute strangers. So once you start thinking that maybe the real situation is more like this blue line, then taking $10,000 off a rich person may have a substantial impact on their happiness because they're still finding new uses of those additions of money to improve happiness, including through helping others. My eighth argument, questioning forced income redistribution, relates to lumpiness, and this is highlighted in some work by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt. The simple argument that each addition of money provides less and less of a happiness boost might make general sense. However, that point needs to be qualified. There are exceptions. Harry Frankfurt goes through the point that you might get additions of money that slightly improve your happiness each time, but then you might get a further addition of money that makes you finally able to afford something that is really important and generates a significant boost in happiness. You might get to an income level where you think, I can finally afford to send my kids to private school. That's a lumpy expenditure compared to free public education. Or you might reach a level of income where you think you can finally afford to pursue that qualification that will get you into a new career that will set your lifetime happiness in a totally different trajectory. Harry Frankfurt goes through a whole range of examples, like you might finally get an income level where you can complete a collection that you've been building your entire life. Because certain happiness-producing expenditures can be lumpy, it may very well be that forced income redistribution takes money from someone who had just, or was about to achieve some great boost in happiness, because they were just about to get to a stage where they could afford something really important. Take money away from that person, you could substantially reduce their happiness. Transfer money to someone who is not on the cusp of some great achievement that would boost their happiness, and overall, it is not at all clear that you will be improving the happiness of the society as a whole. Finally, people are different. It could very well be that some people get more bang for their buck. In fact, it's indeed the case. Some people get more of their happiness from things that money can buy compared to other people. Indeed, it is likely that the people who have a lot of money are the people who get a lot out of money. So taking money from someone like that and giving it to someone who does not get as much of a happiness boost from money means that you can in no way be sure, plus in addition to all the other arguments, that forced income redistribution is even of a net benefit to society. That, in conjunction with the idea that there's no free rider issue, means that I am in no way convinced that it is indeed a role for government at all. As it happens, purely by accident essentially from my perspective, poverty reduction is a byproduct of good government. If government will run according to libertarian principles, it would just so happen that in Australia we would be helping people here and overseas who would be classed as poor. Whether or not they're classed as being in poverty is a different question. I'll just briefly run through a couple of points here. As my talk has indicated today, I believe government should really focus on areas where there is a free riding risk. Otherwise, you could come to the conclusion that even if there is a net benefit, it can be done, it can be achieved by people themselves through voluntary action. So government should only deal with areas where there's free riding, and in addition, there needs to be a demonstrated net benefit from the government intervention. If that were the case, government would be a whole lot smaller, taxes would be less, there'd be more room for land. If government collected its necessary revenues in a way that tried to minimise effect on behaviour, we wouldn't have import tariffs. Now, we currently exempt least developed countries from Australia's import tariffs, but we still impose our small tariffs on middle-income countries, which still have a large number of poor people. If we abolish our import tariffs, we would be substantially helping them. Whilst there continue to be communal benefits in Australian society, in my mind there would still be a case for us to restrict our immigration, as new migrants come in and take a share of these communal goods that are provided and are owned by incumbent Australians. That said, there is a case for converting our current quota system into a tariff system, where instead of you having to meet qualitative criteria to get into the country, you pay a fee. Now, in my mind, that fee should reflect the communal assets and the communal services that a new migrant would enjoy when they come. Under my preferred system of government, those communal assets would be substantially reduced. Those communal services would be substantially reduced. As a result, the fee could be quite low. That would induce the migration of a lot of people into Australia who, at least according to our standards, are poor. So, just incidental to good government, we would be helping poor foreigners. We would also, incidentally, be helping poor Australians. We've already talked about the ban on low-paid work, which we euphemistically call the minimum wage. There's no free rider argument behind that. It's for that reason that I think we should abolish it. But it would have a happy byproduct of getting a whole lot of unemployed people into work. Final point I would like to make on this, these products is that we still have some race and community-specific welfare programs in this country. Run through the free rider argument, you cannot find a free rider argument to support the fact that we have this thing called CDEP. We still have it. This is where the government pays you more than the dole, somewhat close to the minimum wage, if you are an Aboriginal person working in 60 remote communities, not necessarily in a real job, as long as it's related to something that the elites of that area consider to be enhancing the community. It's make-work exercises chosen by the elite. You can only get this additional money far and above the level of the dole if you stay in these remote communities, many of which are completely dysfunctional. There's no justification for these policies. They should be abolished. If they were abolished, they would have a byproduct, unintentional, but a byproduct of reducing the draw to these remote communities. That would surely be of benefit. That's the final point I'd like to make. In summary, because poverty reduction is not a role of government, I think we should not give up ground on that point. Government is a good tool for some purposes. It should only be used for its specific purposes. But sometimes you should put down the tool and do something with your own hands. When we come across people who care about poverty reduction, we should tell them, why don't you do something about it? If that were the case, government would be better both for the rich and for the poor. That's all I want to talk about.